Good morning, everyone. This episode is entitled The Best Way for Roman Agents to Hide from the 12 Apostles and Their Successors Any Schismatic or Apostate Teachings Against Jesus' Teachings was to write adverse accounts about the apostles and or corruptions of our Gospels in Greek or Latin, not in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Syriac. That may seem obvious to you, but what you would find if you would study this in depth, you'll see Christian apologists, most of them, I would say, try to pretend that the apostles could speak Greek, and therefore the works we're seeing were all originally written in Greek, including Matthew, and therefore we're actually just looking at not translations of uh, in Greek. We're looking at the originals, and therefore they want to push on you something that is preposterous, that the apostles who wrote Gospels, Matthew and John, were literate in Greek and could write perfect Greek. Let me just give you a little quick preview of all that. Is Acts 21, 36, 38. This is Paul in front of the Roman officers who are at the temple trying to figure out why Paul's being accused of anything wrong. And all the dialogue is obviously not going on in Greek. And guess what? Somebody wants to talk to the Greek visitors from Asia Minor, the Jews of Asia in particular, are mentioned. And Paul says, I want to speak Greek to them. And watch what happens. And as Paul was about to be led into the castle away from these people, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? And he said, Can you speak Greek? Canst thou speak Greek? So he says, Yes. So this is the exception to the rule. In other words, Paul comes from Asia Minor. He was born in Tarsus. He was born where they speak Greek. That was his native language when he grew up. And that's why he could speak Greek. But that was shocking and surprising and amazing to this centurion, the leader of this group of 100 troops. So he is shocked that somebody knows Greek in this category. Why is that? Because there are no Greek schools in Judea, and it's, if you study that in depth, you'll find out there's no schools. But I wanted to show you from the basically just looking at the Bible, you can figure it out. Then you have here in Acts 4:13, the Sanhedrin is visiting with two of the apostles, and they're trying to tell them to shut up, stop preaching Christ. And it is mentioned in Acts 4, verse 13. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, these are two apostles, right? John is one of them in particular we need to keep in mind because he wrote a gospel, and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men. Does that mean Peter could read any of Paul's writings in Greek? No. He didn't know any of his writings in Greek because he couldn't read Greek. He was unlearned and ignorant. And that's what the Sanhedrin is noticing about them. They're unschooled people. They're ruffians, so to speak, in that sense. They're just fishermen. And that's all they do. And that's all they know. And they are not trained to be speaking or writing in any foreign language, such as Greek. And Greek is not the language of Judea. And that's a falsehood that you'll just hear. And it's just untrue. But even if it were true, these men are ignorant of it. They're not trained. They're not learned. Let me show you this. The Gospel of Matthew, is that written in Greek? No. What's the best history on that? Papias, a pupil of Apostle John. That means he's in direct communication with John, the apostle, around 90 AD, explained about this book of Matthew. He said, Matthew put together the oracles of the Lord in the Hebrew language, and each one interpreted them as best as he could. That's in Eusebius Ecclesiastical 3:39. Quoting exposition of the oracles of the Lord. And here it is. If you want to see the whole thing, this is the same quote I just gave you, and you can get it out of the book called the Ecclesiastical History of Eusebius Pamphilus. And that's 1908, page 116. I will provide a link to all my public domain books. This will be one of them. Look under 1908, and you'll find the quote, and you'll be able to verify. Let's go back. Irenaeus likewise says, Matthew also issued a written gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect. Irenaeus Against Heresies, book 3, chapter 1, quoted in Eusebius, book 5, chapter 8, and you will find book 5, book 5, chapter 8, and it's here, page 176, and you can follow it there. Then another reference is from Origen, who's a famous Christian scholar in the early 200s. He says around 236 AD, he refers to the sole tradition handed down about the origin of the Greek Matthew. It was a translation of the Hebrew original. When read in context, one realizes the importance of Origen's comment. Here's his quote. Concerning the four Gospels, which alone are uncontroverted in the Church of God under heaven, I have learned by tradition that the Gospel according to Matthew, who was at one time a publican and afterwards an apostle of Jesus Christ, was written first, and that he composed it in the Hebrew tongue and published it for the converts from Judaism. So you're going to always hear Mark came first. Well, because they deny there's even a Hebrew Matthew. They act like it's an incorrect document. So because why? Because it's lost. But it wasn't lost. It existed all the way into the 800s in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And they even had the Steacotomy was a book that counted the number of lines in the gospel to the Hebrews by Matthew. Somewhere, somehow, and for some reason, it had to be destroyed. And it happened after 800 AD. Okay, but anyway, Origen writes that, and this is also in Eusebius Ecclesiastical History 625-4, and here you'll find that too, and that'll be in the public domain, same public domain book. Go to page 231, you'll find the quote I just referenced to you. So everything I'm telling you will be verified, and then we're going to go into also later more depth in this video at the end, where we're going to talk about Apostle John's Gospel and how Papias was his clerk. And I just want to reverse course here and show you something from modern day that will remind you that translations can be deliberately corrupted in order to influence history. And one particular event in history I want to bring to your attention because I think it's remarkable and a fact that we should know even in the modern era. These things go on. So I decided to try to find an example in history where a translation has made a huge difference, and basically from one foreign language into the language that people thought would be the correct translation, and the translators deliberately changed it so that the person receiving it in their own language doesn't realize that it was corrupted and it didn't say what it was supposedly saying in the translation. So the translation is actually false, but the person wouldn't know it because they don't know the language. In this case, the CIA officials back in Washington could not have known, and maybe all the political figures couldn't have known this English translation was deliberately falsified from Vietnamese because they don't speak Vietnamese. And that's how these corrupted people inside of the State Department made a war begin, because by lying to us that we actually had been attacked. And it really came down to lying about what the Vietnamese had said in a memo, we sacrificed 2 of our comrades, and these guys put in there, we sacrificed 2 ships. And so based on that, we believe they actually had sunk 2 of our ships, even though we had no evidence of it. We had lost radio communication with these ships, but it was a radio error, and we knew that later. So what happened to the memo? Why did a country go to war? Because we thought these memos were correct translation, and they weren't. So this was a revenge on Vietnam is the title of this article. 5 times the translation changed the course of history. So number 3 of the 5 is the revenge on Vietnam. And most of you are young people, so you don't know what I'm talking about, Vietnam and Gulf of Tonkin. Well, in the era I grew up, there was a situation where they lost contact with a ship, the United States government. They assumed it wasn't a radio error, it was sunk. And they were asked by to check on cables between the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, and all that, and they were told they are reporting they've sacrificed 2 of our ships, and this was a translation of an intercept, but it actually was being lied to. It said we sacrificed 2 comrades, and the United States, based on that, there was an immediate Gulf of Tonkin resolution to go to war against Vietnam. Now, before I play the clip, I want you to know the cost of war. 58,220 U.S. servicemen died in a war that never should have happened. There was no basis. In fact, Vietnam had not attacked us. We were not in need of defending ourselves from this country. And that's just a fact of life. This is the National Archives report. 58,220 U.S. military fatal casualties of the Vietnam War. These records were transferred into the custody of the National Archives and Records Administration in 2008. It's a fact of life. These men shouldn't have died. 2 people lied, did a false report. Now listen to Robert McNamara, the guy in charge, admits that he was defrauded.
Captain Herrick recommended a complete evaluation before any further action. On August 5th, President Lyndon Johnson denounced the actions of the North Vietnamese as open aggression on the high seas, and the U.S. military retaliated by bombing North Vietnamese installations and destroying patrol boats. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara admitted that no attack took place. Yet, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was used as an excuse to wage war in Vietnam.
And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong. It didn't happen.
So if you think that it's not possible that the Gospels and other things were written in Greek to conceal from you the truth, and therefore you wouldn't know there was a mistranslation, they could deliberately change things and corrupt it so you can't see it anymore, what it originally said. Now, I'm not saying it's a lot of stuff, but we can definitely see what one of them was, and I'll get into that in another episode. But let's just now jump ahead. I already gave you these examples from Acts 21, where Paul amazes someone that he can speak Greek, meaning the people of that culture were not speakers of Greek, let alone readers of Greek. But Paul was born outside of Israel, and he could speak Greek because he was raised in Tarsus, which was a Greek-speaking area, an area that was conquered long ago by the Greeks in the era of Alexander the Great. And the Romans basically just took over the country and basically left it kind of the way it was, and getting their people to change to Latin could wait. Just like in Judea, they don't have to make the Judeans switch to uh, Hebrew, from Hebrew to Greek or Latin. So they are not caring about that so much. And that's why people don't speak Greek. They don't speak Latin. They are illiterate. And that's what we learned again. I'll repeat again, Acts 4:13, the Sanhedrin are meeting with Peter and John and saying, stop preaching the gospel. And they say, in Hebrew, obviously, even there, they just came across as unlearned and ignorant. They're not educated people. There were no schools in Galilee, other than if you went to a Hebrew school, maybe, and you might learn a little Hebrew as adjunct to the synagogue, but nothing else. There were no educations. There were no colleges. I've done a whole episode on that. And then here we have, I've already read this to you. Papias saying in around 90 AD, he's a direct associate, directly involved with John the Apostle, and he's the translator. He's the person who took it from Aramaic, from John, verbally, and rendered it. Obviously, he knew Aramaic, so he could write it in Aramaic, and then he could rewrite it in Greek. And it's superb Greek, by the way, fantastic Greek. John, that's another reason why John didn't write it physically. He gave the words to Papias, and Papias then translated it. So whether we like it or not, the Gospel of John is a translation in Greek. But you're told, no, this is how it was originally written. No, it was originally spoken in Aramaic. And one of the reasons we know that is just looking to the earlier work of the Book of Revelation, which is basically an Aramaic text with some Greek words and many Aramaic terms spelled in Greek letters, like Nicholas, the Nicolaitans. What do you think that is? It means let us eat in Aramaic. Let us eat, Nicholas. But Nicolaitans is a way of making it sound Greek, and everybody didn't know what he was talking about. But if you knew he was speaking in Aramaic, you would know he was saying, let us eat. And this was Jesus condemning the Nicolaitans for people who said you can just eat whatever you want. And that's the mocking term he used was, there are people who just say, let us eat whatever we want. And that's what it meant. Anyway, the point is this, is we know that John, by writing the book of Revelation 30 years before his gospel, didn't know Greek there either. He was writing in Aramaic, and maybe somebody was helping him phonetically change the letters or whatever it was, but he didn't know Greek then, and he clearly could never reach the level of like a college graduate level that Papias, Bishop of Hierapolis, was able to do. And that's why he was able to do the Gospel of John in Greek. But he didn't himself write it. He couldn't have possibly written it. He's an unlearned man, just as it says here. He's unlearned and ignorant. John is unlearned and ignorant. Could he write the most supreme Greek you've ever read in your life? That really is a fantastically written book. No, he could never have done that. Let's move on. Now, let me just show you, and I told you about Apostle Matthew, and you can check that out. But here's about the interesting facts about John's gospel. John writes the gospel in about 96 AD, and he dictates it in Aramaic to Papias, who writes and translates it into Greek. And here's some of the references in Eusebius's work on the ecclesiastical history. And this is at page 113 of this book to the left, 1908 book. There are said to be 5 books of Papias which bear the title Interpretations of our Lord's Decorations. Irenaeus also makes mention of these as the older works written by Papias, who was John's hearer and the associate of Polycarp. So here is guy Papias who actually knew John. It's very rare that you can actually prove there's somebody we can say is writing books who knew John. And we know who and what role Papias served. Now, Eusebius in the 300 says the book of Revelation came prior to the Gospel of John. He says this: he, the Apostle John, wrote the Gospel in the province of Asia after he had composed the Apocalypse. So the Gospel is after the book of the Apocalypse. Apocalypse, for whatever reason, people started changing in the late 1800s to be the book of Revelation, but it used to be known as the Apocalypse. Whatever they've changed it, it's succeeded in changing it. He, the Apostle John, wrote this gospel in the province of Asia after he had composed the Apocalypse on the island of Patmos. A few months before his death, that was in September of 96, the emperor had discontinued the persecution of Christians and were called the exiles. So, and that's Eusebius Ecclesiastics 3:20, 5-7, and I have that right here. So if you want to read it, again, this book will be posted in my description to the video. You can download the book from my public domain list. There's couple hundred books in there, I think. And so you can see that the mention by Eusebius here. It was then also that the Apostle John returned from his banishment in Patmos and took up his abode at Ephesus according to an ancient tradition of the church. So Bishop Papias of Hierapolis is nearby Ephesus, so he could go visit him, he could meet with him and take his dictation, write down his translation of the Aramaic terms or language that John is using. And that's the role that's called is amanuensis in Greek, and it's also an English borrowed term meaning an assistant scribe who writes down what somebody else is saying in a different tongue. Let me do this. I'm going to put together, you can see the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verse 8, where this is going to be said, the same thing, 7 and 8. We'll copy exactly what we read here from Eusebius, recording what Apostle John said, even in the book of Revelation, at the time he was writing in the 300s, about 315 AD. So he's definitely aware of the same text we're going to read here right now. And you'll see why I'm emphasizing this passage. Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keeps the sayings of the prophecy of this book. And I, John, saw these things and heard them. Notice what he's not saying. I, John, wrote this. He said, I saw these and heard them. He's telling an oral history to somebody else. And then he says, and when I had heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel who showed me these things. So he is definitely also showing he's a fallible human being. He's just relaying what he's heard and seen. That's what I think he's trying to show you. And he is definitely not claiming he wrote it. He's telling you, I heard and saw the things you are hearing and reading when you read it. And that fits exactly what Papias said, that he was the amanuensis, and that's recorded in the Toledo Bible of the 700s, a quote from Papias' book explaining how he was the amanuensis, the clerk, or the scribe, to transcribe the words of John into, probably first into Aramaic, Hebrew, and then into Greek. Okay, so that's important because, again, if you want to fool these people, you want to pull one over on the apostles, what if you wrote in Greek? They don't know Greek. Even John's most fantastically written Greek work is not written by him. It was written by Papias, and we need to know that so we don't get misled. And a friend of mine, or a new friend of mine, is actually translating the Aramaic version of John. And you say, well, where'd that come from? Well, apparently it was preserved in something called the Crawford Codex. Now, I haven't studied any of that yet. I don't know if it's legitimate, but it is from I think a 10th, 12th century text. So the question is, was it preserved all these centuries? And let's take a look. So he's going to publish this book soon. I can't wait to see it. His name is Richard Audlin. So we'll find out. But the point is this, is that there's something that we need to do sometimes and dig in and find out what this book originally said. And we'll get into that in more detail. But the point is, it's a translation too. But what's different about it also, it's in the first person. So when you read Matthew doesn't step out in the Greek version. He doesn't step out and say, I'm Matthew. But honestly, if you read the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, it is in first person. Actually, it starts off where they're all talking together. The apostles begin talking together in the opening, and then it switches to Matthew speaking in the first person, and he says, "I, Matthew, when Jesus came to visit my house, da 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 happened." So what we get a different perspective only if we go under the Greek text and find the earlier text, and then we find there's a change. There's a first person account of Matthew. There's a first person account, always was in John, as you see. But neither one of these works, Hebrew Gospel Matthew or John's Gospel, even though it looks like it's in Greek, it was really in Aramaic first. These two works were not in Greek, telling you if you were a Roman agent and you want to fool these people, somebody who knows Greek would write everything in Greek so the apostles wouldn't know what that person is teaching. They would have to find out. Somebody would have to come from like the Asia Minor area, like the happened in Acts 21. Obviously, these were people claiming and telling the church uh, Paul is guilty of apostasia. That's the word in Acts 21, verse 21, that James says, we've been told that you're guilty of apostasia. It's a rumor. We want you to disprove it. You have to take this vow to show us and prove everyone you are keeping the law, Paul. And Paul does exactly what he's told. So he's not disclosing to them anything, and he's taking advantage of their inability, taking advantage of James and 12's inability to penetrate through anything that's in writing. Even if somebody handed it to him, said, it says this. Well, how do they know? The only way they know for fact what he believes is he has to act out and obey the law. And then they gave him a vow to take, which would prove to them he keeps the law. He's not going to take this vow in a hypocritical manner. Would he? No, they don't think he would be that outrageously dishonest, but he takes the vow and he does the vow to prove that he keeps the law. That's in Acts 21. Let me show you that real quick. So I want to read you something, and I just want you to assume the Jews of Asia are Jews, right? And they're telling James and the 12, we've read stuff that said this guy says that are apostasy and tell us not to circumcise. There's no more Jew or Gentile. All these things that you all know is true, but the 12 know nothing about it. And the only way they can try to test Paul to see if he really is that way or not is to give him some commands to do something to prove that he keeps the law. And if he does that, then they're going to assume all this is bunk. Now listen to what they say in Acts 21. This is James talking. But they were told about you. James is saying the disciples, meaning including the 12, about you, that you are teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to apostatize, apostasy of Moses, apostatize against Moses. That's a violation of Deuteronomy 13, 1-10. Anybody who turns you away from keeping God's law is an apostate and is worthy of death, a death penalty. Telling them not to circumcise their children and not to walk according to our customs. So this is a very serious charge, nothing below the level of, it's not like a food law. This is like you're going to hell if you do this. You can't be an apostate or you'll go to hell. What then is to be done? That they will certainly hear that you have come. Talking about obviously the Jews of Asia who are mentioned in context. Now, James is going to give him, I just want to make sure I got how many commands there is. What will be done? He's very concerned. He's going to give him 1, 2, 3, 4 commands. Listen to this. So you realize the tone is, we need you to do this. There is no exception to this because they have no other, they're desperate. They have no way of reading any of the stuff he's writing because they don't read Greek. Therefore, do what we tell you. There are with us 4 men who have taken upon themselves a vow. And this is a Nazirite vow in context. You can tell by what he's going to tell him. And Nazirite vow is Numbers chapter 6 of the Torah. Verse 24, take these men and purify yourself along with them, and then include letting your hair grow long during the period of this vow, and pay their expenses, and they may shave their heads. So at the end of the vow, you shave your heads, your hair gets very long, more than usual, and then you shave off the long hair, and you offer the hair in sacrifice. The hair is burnt as part of the sacrifice. And then pay their expenses, and all this involves fees. And they may shave their heads, and everyone will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, that you're an apostate. You're going to prove to everyone you're not an apostate. So Paul knows 100% they don't have a clue of anything he's writing that is apostate, that you can eat whatever you want. 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, you can eat meat sacrificed to idols. They have no clue. Next, what happens is James brings up the Gentiles. So this is important for us Gentiles, right? It's Acts 20, verse 125. And he's going to remind Paul that we gave an instruction in Acts 15, if you don't recall, this was many years earlier, and it's obvious he's also gotten wind or is suspecting that Paul may not be teaching what he was told to teach, including don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, which clearly we know in 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, Paul says it's okay to do that, but it's in Greek. The 12 can't find out what that means. Let's read verse 25. But as for the Gentiles who have believed or obeyed, we sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols. Meat sacrificed to idols, Jesus condemns that twice in the book of, 3 times actually, in the book of Revelation. One, he commends one church for rejecting those who claim they're apostles but aren't and teach you to eat whatever you want, the Nicolaitans. And he says to the other 2 churches that are succumbing to eating meat sacrificed to idols, he condemns them and he tells them stop doing that. And he's very rigorously upset that they're not doing the works they're supposed to do. And if you don't, and this lukewarm works that you're doing, if you don't correct your you don't make a course correction, you will the flame will go out for you. So that's how he put it. Anyway, let's go back. We sent a letter, James says, with our judgment that the Gentiles should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, which of course Paul absolutely allows in 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Corinthians 10, saying, oh, an idol's nothing. Well, that's not the point. It's the blessing by pagan priests over the meat that is deemed to make the meat spiritually impure, and you should not get near it. Let's continue. And from blood, that means any meat that has blood in it. And Paul waves his hand in Romans. He says, you can eat whatever you want, and it's only people who have a weak conscience who even think there's anything to worry about. God doesn't care about food. Does God really care about food? No, he doesn't care about food. Paul, but you can see here, Luke is not aware of these passages either. He's not seen the letters himself, obviously, and from what has been strangled and from sexual immorality. So, and if you go back to Acts 15, the next verse after that is he says, for the Gentiles will go every week and hear the words of Moses read, and they'll catch up. In other words, they'll hear what they need to do beyond that, whatever there may be. Anyway, let's continue. Verse 26 of Acts 21. Then Paul took the men, and on the next day he purified himself with them and went into the temple. What is he doing? He's a complete spiritual weakling if you believe in Paul. Shouldn't he have been honest and say, I believe the law has been abrogated. It's a tutor. It wasn't even given by God. It was given by angels who are weak and beggarly, Galatians 3:19 and Galatians 4:6 and 9. And why would we want to go and be in bondage again to them, James? Are you not... I know you're Jesus' brother. I know you are the king of Israel while he's gone. And if the Roman Empire fell, you're supposed to be our king. But I'm going to disregard you and snipe at you. That's what he should have said. Be honest. But he wasn't, was he? Paul took the men, and the next day he purified himself with them and went into the temple, giving notice of the completion of the days of purification, at which time the sacrifice of the hair, the burning of the hair, would be offered on behalf of each one of them. So this is who we are dealing with, and he knows full well they have no idea what he's writing. They can't read Greek, and he's trying to sneak in there and do exactly what they say and give them a misleading impression. And he knows they have no other way of testing him because they don't know how to read anything he writes. That's why they're doing this. They need to know, is he really on our side or not? And he gives them a completely false impression. And this is exactly what a secret agent has to do. He has to stay in the dark, not let them know the truth, when the truth would have been very damaging to him. He could not have tried to carry out his mission to subvert this group and destroy it by a mission of subversion. And what I told you in the other episodes is divide in impera, and that means divide and conquer. That's in Julius Caesar's book. And I think it's on the Conquest of Gaul is the name of the book. And he mentioned that's their strategy. You divide the people ahead of time. And then by the time you get there, you can win the war easily because the people are all divided, because you created a propaganda machine within that country. You've taken over the religion. You've subverted the religion. Whatever it is, you do whatever it takes. The Romans are very systematic in how they take over countries. And that's how they became a world empire. Divide et impera. And Paul is doing that right inside of our church. And he has to hide out and pretend to be what he isn't, a person who keeps God's law, right? Remember what James said. What did he say to him? He says to them, if you do this, they will learn. They have been told, everyone will know, if you do this, that there's nothing in what they have been told about you, not a iota of truth to it, but that you yourself walk keeping the law. And what did he do? He deliberately misled James and the 12 apostles. And how could he get away with it? Because they can't speak Greek. That's the key. And anybody who tells you that the Gospels were written in Greek are lying, or they don't know history, or they don't know the time period, or they don't care. They want to just believe what they want to believe, and it doesn't make any sense. And you can see here the only reason why they didn't know what Paul was doing is because they can't read any of his epistles. Even people tell him what it says, they're not sure. They needed proof positive, and this is what they gave him, and he lied to them by his actions. He's a corrupt individual. He is not going to be the person you're going to rely upon if you're a smart, wise, Holy Spirit filled Christian. You're going to realize, oops, I can see it now. Thank you. I can see it. The writing is right in front of me. I can't unsee what I've just seen. You'd have to poke my eyes out to get rid of my memory of what I just saw. That's what you got to say to yourself. I've got to follow Christ. Stop following Paul, because he is not what you think he is. He's a Roman agent. All right. God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.